they should be thrown out of office. That's deeply disrespectful, not only of people's freedom of speech, but of people's freedom of religion and their freedom of conscience. I mean, it's hard to imagine that a place that styles itself as a democracy, or a country that styles itself as upholding civil liberties, would have such legislation and would give politicians and police officers that kind of power.
Robert George is McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University, and he's the director of the James Madison Programme. He has an impressive array of prestigious appointments and has served on numerous US commissions and US President's Councils. And he's also a US member of UNESCO World Commission, the Judicial Fellow of the US Supreme Court, and he's received so many awards I could not actually begin to list them, including the US President's Citizens Medal. In addition, he has been described as perhaps the greatest living philosopher in the United States. He's also the author of many books on topics as wide-ranging as marriage, abortion, morality, and law, and his latest book is this one, Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth. So, Professor George, thank you for joining me today.
It's my very great pleasure. Thank you, Philip.
Tell me about the new book. What is it about and why did you write it?
Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth brings together essays that I've published over the past decade, integrated around a small number of concerns, and they've concerns that have largely grown out of my teaching. Central to those concerns are concerns about the temptation or tendency of so many people today, and not just students, even grown-ups, to suppose that there's no such thing as truth, no such thing as objective truth, that you have your truth and I have my truth, and your truth and my truth may be in conflict, but yours is valid for you and mine is valid for me. And that, I think, is connected with, again, a temptation or tendency to treat our feelings, our emotions, our desires as sources of truth. You have your truth because you have your feelings. My feelings are different, so I have my truth. And my big worry there, Philip, is that feelings, emotions, are very, very unreliable indicators of truth. As a matter of fact, I think there are often truths, not just your truth, not just my truth, but the truth. We may disagree about what it is. We may feel differently about it, but I believe that there is a truth of the matter with respect to many, many questions, scientific questions, historical questions, moral questions, religious questions, all sorts of questions. And the way to get to the truth is not by consulting our viscera, consulting our feelings, but by using the old noggin, using the intellect, thinking, assessing the evidence, listening to the arguments on the competing sides of the question, looking for the reasons that people may have for believing X, but then the competing reasons for not believing X.
What I liked about the opening of the book was it puts all that in a beautifully simple context, that our history as human beings has been in many ways a search for the truth, and we went through, you put it as 3 different ages, where the first age was the age of faith, and we looked to the church, I suppose, solely for the truth there. And then we moved into the age of reason, and we looked to reason, argument, evidence for our basis for finding the truth. And now we have moved into, surprisingly, the age of feelings, where feelings are now the touchstone of what is true and what is not true.
Yeah, let me expand on that a little bit. It's the historians, some historians, who are fond of breaking up the eras or the epochs into the age of this and the age of that. And so they tell us, Philip, that the medieval period was the age of faith. Now, what do they mean by that? They mean that, well, for the medievals, especially the great medieval thinkers, and whether they were Christian or Jewish or Muslim, for them, the ultimate touchstone of truth and therefore of justice, of goodness, of right, the touchstone was conformity with the teachings of the faith. Again, whether it's the Christian faith, whether it's the Jewish faith, we have figures like Aquinas, we have figures like Maimonides in the Jewish tradition. We have the various great Muslim thinkers, and for all of them, they had different faiths, different traditions of faith. But for all of them, the ultimate touchstone of truth was conformity with the teaching of the faith. Now, we have to be careful here not to oversimplify this rather complex matter, because those great medieval thinkers were also men of reason. It's not that they deprecated reason, not at all. They believed that reason was very important. And in fact, they believed that the path to truth was really the unity of faith and reason, that faith and reason working together could get us nearer to the truth or deeper into truths that we grasped. But still, there's some truth in the historian's classification of the medieval period as the age of faith, because at the end of the day, the ultimate touchstone was conformity with faith. Well, then they tell us, these historians, that along comes the Enlightenment or Enlightenments in Europe, in Germany, and in France, and there in England and Scotland. And for the great Enlightenment figures, the ultimate touchstone of truth and therefore of goodness, of justice, of right, was conformity with the findings of inquiry, scientific inquiry, whether we're talking about the natural sciences or the social sciences, but the fruit of investigation, using the intellect, assessing the evidence, considering the arguments. Now, there's truth in this too, but we have to be careful not to oversimplify. We shouldn't assume, because it was false, that all of the great, or even most of the great Enlightenment thinkers in any of the places that I mentioned, were strict secularists or atheists. Many of them were people of faith. You can begin that list, of course, with Isaac Newton. Many were people of faith, but nevertheless, it's true. It captures a great truth to say that for the great Enlightenment thinkers, at the end of the day, the ultimate touchstone is conformity with the findings of science or of reason more broadly, rational inquiry more broadly. So, if for the medieval period, we've got the age of faith, if the Enlightenment was the age of reason, in what age do we live? Well, we can figure that out by asking, what do people today, especially but not exclusively young people, like the people I teach, the students I teach, what for them is regarded as the touchstone? What do they treat as the touchstone of truth, of goodness, of understanding, of right, of justice? And here, Philip, so often it's conformity with feeling or my feelings. How do I feel about this issue or that issue? I find the truth for me by sorting through my feelings, seeing how I feel. People sometimes even suppose that great questions about my identity, for example, whether I'm male or female, can be determined by how I feel, whether I feel male or feel female. So I fear that we do live in the age of feeling, and my concern about that is that feelings are really unreliable guides to truth. Now, truth is complicated. Many truths are very difficult to attain. Perhaps some are impossible at the end of the day to attain. We'll never know the truth fully. We'll never know it perfectly. Whatever true beliefs we have in our heads, they're always going to be mixed with some false beliefs. That's true with every single one of us. We do our best, if we live by reason, to swap out as many of the false beliefs as we can and replace them with true beliefs. So, we're limited, we're fallible, we're certainly very frail. Even relying on reason, or on the combination of faith and reason, which both the medieval period folks and the Enlightenment period folks did in their various ways, we're going to make some mistakes. But I nevertheless am persuaded that we're going to be on sounder ground. We're going to make fewer mistakes and smaller mistakes, less likely to make many mistakes and big mistakes, if we don't rely on our subjective feelings.
Have we divided society into two groups of people? Those who trust feelings first and those who trust reason first? Or is that too simplified a view of our polarization?
Well, we need to be careful because it's complex, so we don't want to oversimplify it. But at its core, that's correct. And I think I can explain why. So long as we have in common the belief that the way to assess propositions, to arrive at the truth as best we can, never perfectly, never fully, but as long as we agree that reason, rational inquiry, deliberation, judgment is the way to go, then though we may disagree on what the truth is, we will be operating from common ground in believing that we can benefit, both of us, from a conversation, from an argument, from exchanging reasons,
But that's only
from
if you trust
allowing ourselves to
reason.
be challenged and criticized because we know we're fallible and we could be wrong. But when you shift, Philip, from the belief in reason to the belief in feeling as the source of truth, well, then if you have your truth, you have how you feel. And I have my truth, I have how I feel. There is no point in having a conversation. You feel the way you feel, I feel the way I feel. There's no point in my challenging you. There's no point in my challenging point in your challenging me. No point in my challenging you. We're still going to have contests. We're still going to have politics. We're still going to have to make decisions for the commonwealth, for the common good. We're going to have laws. We're going to have policies. We're going to have cultural norms, but it won't be about arriving at them, deciding them on the basis of arguments and exchanges. It will be on the basis of power. My
Does
power
this,
to assert my will, your power to assert your will.
the Michel Foucault approach, but does this explain
Precisely
then
right. He's the
what,
godfather of this stuff.
does this explain why free speech in particular seems to have fallen into disrepute or of no regard to a certain cohort of society?
I think that's true as well. So it helps to explain the analysis I just gave, I think helps to explain the polarization, because there's no point in talking. Reason is no longer the common ground that we share, despite our differences about what we think important truths actually are. But going beyond the polarization, we lose our respect for free speech because speech is not the way to get at the truth of matters. Argument is not the way to get at the truth of matters for people who live in the age of feeling, who embrace the idea of feeling as the source of truth. It's all about power. And if I have the power to shut down your speech that offends me, that I find, quote, harmful, unquote, then I'm going to exercise that power. And when the power shifts over to you, if it does, you'll use your power to shut down my free speech. And we're seeing this. Now, for the last decade and a half, we saw it very worryingly on the left side of the political spectrum, at least here in the United States. You might have had a similar or different experience in Britain, but here in the United States, the concept of free speech lost its force for much of the left. Now we're seeing the same thing happening on the conservative side. And conservatives who were champions of free speech for that decade and a half or 2 decades, when those on the left seemed to lose their respect for it, have now, quite hypocritically in many cases, abandoned their belief in free speech and want to use the political power they have to shut down other people's free speech. And my plea to both sides, Philip, is to be principled defenders of free speech. We need free speech. It is critical to the success of our democratic polities. And it's certainly critical to the mission of truth-seeking institutions like universities. If universities lose free speech, we are just propaganda mills. We are no longer institutions of learning.
The principal argument that, as I understand it, against free speech within universities and other places in society too, is that free speech is limited up to the point where it becomes hate speech. Again, there's feelings involved in the idea
Yeah.
of hate, being unkind. What's your view of the hate speech argument that there's a limitation on freedom of speech up to hate speech?
I think it becomes a pretext for shutting down speech that challenges our most cherished beliefs, our core beliefs, our identity forming beliefs. And it means that we immunize or inoculate our beliefs against challenge and against criticism. Now, if we know anything, Philip, about the history of humanity, we know that people with the best will in the world, uh, smart people, nevertheless get things wrong. And they not only get minor, trivial, superficial, relatively unimportant things wrong, we get big, important questions wrong. We're wrong sometimes on things that really matter. And the only way we can correct our errors is to allow even our most cherished beliefs, even our identity forming beliefs, to be challenged. And the only way we're going to make progress is to be open to that challenge. So, free speech, I've often said, is to intellectual life, and I would add political life, what oxygen is to biological life. You take away the oxygen, you're dead in a matter of a few minutes. You take away free speech, intellectual life is dead in a very, very short period of time.
But
So that's why I'm opposed to any kind of hate speech limitations on speech. The other consideration that I hope anyone would be able to see the force of is, I'll just ask it as a question. Who exactly are we supposed to trust
I
to
was going to go on to
distinguish
that
hate
next.
speech from speech that just, challenges our core convictions? I mean, I don't trust the President of the United States. I don't care whether that president is Democrat or Republican. I don't trust the Supreme Court of the United States. I wouldn't trust the Prime Minister of Britain, whether it's Tory or Labor or something else. I wouldn't trust the president of my university, although I think he's a very fine man. I wouldn't trust the president of any university. I wouldn't trust myself with that power. Nobody should be trusted with that power.
And yet that power is being wielded when we use the words or when words are used, such as misinformation or disinformation. And it seems that authorities set themselves up. The BBC has a good reputation for giving unbiased news, but it set up something called BBC Verify to determine what is true and what is not true.
Yeah, we have similar things over here with our social media and other media. It's now been kind of come under the general heading of fact checkers or fact checking. Now, the trouble there is, of course, the fact checkers themselves can make mistakes, or the fact checkers themselves can fall into dogmas and ideologies. So, who checks the fact checkers? It's like the old question about Plato's Republic: who guards the guardians?
Guardians.
I don't want anybody exercising that kind of power. I would rather let to cite now the wisdom of a great English philosopher, one of whom, in many ways, I have been and am critical, John Stuart Mill, but to nevertheless invoke a concept where I think he gets it exactly right. I think we need a marketplace of ideas. The way to sort truth from error is to let the best arguments be made on competing sides of all propositions, then trust people using their intellects to sort through the pros and cons and arrive as best they can by their own wits, by their own lights, at what they believe to be the truth of the matter, but never to bring the curtain down. No matter how persuaded, no matter even if we get a consensus on a particular set of beliefs about politics or religion or anything else, it still has to be open to criticism. Those beliefs still have to be open to criticism. Even the findings of science. Sometimes we've had a scientific consensus on a question that is exploded in 1 or 2 or 3 generations. All the scientists agreed, and then suddenly it turns out that some scientist figures out that there was an error, and the shared belief, the consensus blows up. Well, we should learn a lesson from our own history, the history of this species. We
I don't
need
think
to
we're very good at
always
learning
allow
lessons from that.
openness for criticism of consensus
This
ideas.
this leads us to another important question then, and that is, are there therefore no limits on free speech at all? Would you, like Elon Musk, call yourself a free speech absolutist, or are there limits on free speech?
I would call myself a near absolutist on matters of free speech. Let me talk about two categories of legitimate restrictions on speech, but I want to stress that they are very narrow. These would be a very small number of cases in which speech could legitimately be uh, restricted. Okay, category one, I believe that there are some types of speech that fall outside the protections that need to be in place, ought to be in place to protect the robust exchange of ideas in the pursuit of truth and in the normal commerce of democracy. Let me give you the most important examples. Actual threats, where I threaten you. I say to you, Philip, all right, Philip, you're done. I'm going to shoot you. Um, Incitement to imminent violence. Now, this has to be understood properly. Imminent violence means imminent violence, not the abstract advocacy of violence. So I wouldn't put Marxists in jail for advocating. I'm rather opposed to Marxism. If you know anything about me, you'll know that. But I would not want to put Marxists in jail for abstractly advocating the violent overthrow of the capitalist order or the state. So the narrow exception to free speech here is actual incitement to imminent violence. There's a mob outside your house. I get them whipped up into a frenzy and I say, let's burn that place down, knowing that I'm going to trigger that mob action to burn down the house with you and your family in it. Number three, defamation. Defamation in our constitutional law in the United States, and I believe this is true in Britain as well, has never been considered protected free speech, and it shouldn't be protected free speech. Um, Obviously, criminal conspiracy. Um, the exchanging words in the committing of a crime. False advertising is another category. So there are a limited number of categories that are outside the protections that need to be in place for free speech to perform its functions for us as individual people pursuing the truth of things and as a democratic polity. Then the second general category are what we call in my field in constitutional law time, place, and manner restrictions on speech. These are restrictions that are legitimate because they are not based on the content of the speech or the viewpoint that's represented in the speech. And they apply irrespective of the viewpoint. They would apply to socialists and libertarians, to Tories and Labor, to Democrats and Republicans, to liberals and conservatives, and so forth and so on. Time, place, and manner restrictions are restrictions of the sort that say, in this library, you cannot shout or use megaphones. Doesn't matter whether you're using the megaphone to shout, vote for the socialists, or you're using the megaphone to shout, defeat the socialists. It's viewpoint neutral. It's content neutral. But we're protecting a place where there are very good reasons for silence, for the place to be very quiet, so people can study. The same with a neighborhood. I don't know if you have in Britain sound trucks. We have sound trucks over here. These are trucks that politicians or political parties sometimes
Oh, yeah.
use with bullhorns on them to go through the town in the middle of the day saying, vote for Davies. He's the man for Needham, Massachusetts, or whatever it is. Now it's fine if the community, let's say Needham, Massachusetts, where you're running for office, wants to say, well, okay, you can drive your truck, Mr. Davies, your sound truck, blaring its message through the main street at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but you can't drive that truck blaring the message through a residential neighborhood at 3 in the morning. Now, you probably wouldn't want to do that anyway because it wouldn't be good for getting votes. But you can see that it's a time, place, and manner restriction. It's not a restriction based on the content, substance, or viewpoint being represented.
Can I give you one particular example which is particularly pertinent to this country because we have a law which is a time, place, and manner law, and I just wanted your view on it. We have restrictions on any demonstrations or posters or even silent demonstrations outside or near within 100 yards of an abortion clinic. Now, some people have been arrested because they have been standing within that 100 yards of an abortion clinic, either with a placard which says, I'm here to talk if you want to, and not said anything, or even just for silently praying, they have been arrested. Does that come under your time, place, and manner restriction?
No, that's really wicked. If your politicians are arresting people for silently praying within a certain
Yeah.
number of yards at an abortion clinic, they should be thrown out of office. That's deeply disrespectful, not only of people's freedom of speech, but of people's freedom of religion and their freedom of conscience. I mean, it's hard to imagine that a place that styles itself as a democracy, or a country that styles itself as upholding civil liberties, would have such legislation and would give politicians and police officers that kind of power over what goes on in people's heads when they're praying or reflecting or meditating or thinking. And indeed, even if they're restricting peaceful protests or peaceful speech outside a particular area, like an abortion clinic or anything else, that's a violation of free speech. This is actually, I'm going to guess here, Philip, you'll have to tell me if I'm right about this. I'm going to guess that this is not actually content neutral. My guess is that they're here interested in suppressing pro-life thought and speech. That this is not actually neutral, and they have the same attitude toward the pro-abortion people as they do to the anti-abortion people. If I speculated on that, would I be maybe right?
Well, no one, of course, protests in the other direction, so it's
Yeah,
labeled as being even-handed, but really
it's
directed at
not.
one side.
Of course it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But there are
pretexts.
there are other instances in this country which I'd value your opinion on, and that is we have quite strong laws against um, tweeting or writing Facebook posts which might offend other people or sectors of society. And this is not a theoretical law. We find, and according to latest statistics, 30 people every day are arrested for something which they posted online which other people found offensive.
That is very bad, in my opinion. People have no right not to be offended. They have no
Yeah.
right not to have their ideas criticized, include their political ideas, their religion, their religious ideas, their moral ideas. Nobody has the right not to be offended. Nobody has the right to have their ideas immunized or inoculated against criticism. I have beliefs. I have religious beliefs. I have moral beliefs. I have political beliefs that I deeply hold. I deeply cherish. They are very central to my own sense of who I am, my own identity. I don't want a single one of those, Philip, to be inoculated against criticism. I want people to be able to criticize them. It might turn out that I'm wrong, and I'm not going to get anywhere near finding that out if, in fact, they are wrong, if no one is allowed to challenge me or criticize me.
Yeah. We also have something else which I'd like your view on, and that is, I don't know if you've heard of this. They're called non-crime hate incidents.
What
And
is that?
a non-crime hate incident is, as it says, it's not a crime. If you were to tweet something about your neighbor, which your neighbor didn't like, then the neighbor can complain to the policeman. And the policeman might come and knock on your door, ask you to come and accompany him to the police station, where he would record, if no crime had been committed, what is recorded as a non-crime hate incident. Now, the importance of this is it goes on your record, and if people are doing a search against you for a job of some kind, then it can disqualify you for that job, even though no crime has been committed.
Philip, this is shocking to me. I lived for 5 wonderful years of my life in your great country. Your country is in many ways the cradle of liberty. We didn't get our ideas of liberty here in the United States from nowhere. We did fight a revolution to overthrow British rule, but we adopted core principles of British common law. And the spirit of liberty that we adopted in the United States was, to a very considerable extent, a British spirit of liberty. And when I lived in Britain, it was a free country. People could speak their minds. They could criticize ideas. They could criticize each other. Um, no one was hauled off in those days for, what did you call it? A
Non-crime hate
non-crime
incident.
hate incident, and had this put on their permanent record so it would follow them around when they were seeking jobs or educational opportunities and so forth. Um, this is contrary to the best in your wonderful country. And I would plead with whoever is in power. I think it's the Labor Party now, but whoever comes into power next, I would plead with them to repeal these practices and these policies, restore the British love of liberty, be faithful to that spirit of liberty that really made an enormous difference not only here in the United States but throughout the world. That's the best of the British heritage. Let's get back to it.
I very much envy you over in the States though, because you at least have First Amendment, which
We
we
do.
don't have, and I very much would like to have something equivalent to that. I had the opportunity of
Agreed.
speaking to Lord Jonathan Sumption. You probably may not have heard of him, but he's
Oh
the
no, no, I know his work well on judicial power. He's not only a distinguished jurist, but a very fine legal scholar.
yes, he's a historian too, and in asking him, I spoke about the idea of us having a First Amendment or equivalent First Amendment, and he was very much against the whole idea. I just wondered if you would share that view, or whether you think that a First Amendment would be useful over here.
Well, when I was living there, so I lived in Oxford from 1981 to 1985, and then again in 88, 89, 1988, 89. You did not have a First Amendment, but you had freedom. I had freedom. I had freedom of religion. I'm not a member of the established church, the Anglican Church. I was Catholic. I am Catholic, but I had full freedom of religion. I had freedom of speech. I was writing a thesis on a very controversial topic and saying very controversial things. And I lived in no fear that my publishing my work, which was published by Oxford University Press, would lead me into legal trouble. I knew that, the rules were that you can't threaten people. I had no interest in threatening people. You can't defame people. I had no interest in defaming anybody, but I wanted to defend my views, some of which were very controversial, and I'm sure some of which were offensive to other people. But I didn't have a moment's hesitation or fear because although you didn't have a First Amendment, you had freedom. So if that's what Lord Sumption had in mind, that we were able to have freedom for a very long time, we were able to have basic civil liberties, basic freedom of speech without a First Amendment, then I would agree that you don't need one. But boy, if what you're telling me now is true, people being arrested for praying, people being arrested for peaceful protests, people being hauled down to the police station for, let me get it right again, a non-crime
Non-crime
hate
hate incidents.
incidents, then believe me, Brother Philip, you
Mm.
need a First Amendment. It doesn't have to be called the First Amendment, but you need a constitutional provision protecting the free speech of ordinary British people.
We we are taking the lead, really. I mean, I don't think we're pioneers in closing down free speech. We're taking the lead, probably behind the scenes from the European Union. We have an organization in Europe called the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance. And at the moment, it's just produced a report, and it's pressurizing countries such as Ireland and Finland to write new laws to make their hate speech laws stronger than they are at the moment. They say that they're inadequate, and that this is a way of controlling um, the antagonism within society, or the polarization within society.
Philip, let me say what I think is actually going on there. I think what has emerged is an ideology, very fashionable among elites, like the people who are running the European Union, an ideology which essentially is functioning in their lives and in their societies as a religion. And that religion has decided that there are certain orthodoxies and there are certain heresies. And what they're doing is essentially reenacting the old heresy laws and prosecuting people or proposing to prosecute people for heresy. They're enforcing dogmas. It's the kind of thing that used to happen in Europe and elsewhere, and still happens today, of course, in many nations. You can think of Iran and other places. This is just a religion enforcing orthodoxies by punishing heresy, and they should be called out on it.
Is this co-equal with the woke religion, or is that something different? Are they the same things?
Well, I think they're the same thing. I mean, I think that's that another word for that secularist uh, ideology that you just described as driving the European Union. Another word for that is woke, or the extreme version of that secularist ideology is called wokeism.
Yes, I mean there's another example of it in Finland, where at the moment I don't know if you're aware of it, but there's an MP in Finland who has been prosecuted a number of times on free speech or hate speech violations because she has simply read a passage or tweeted a passage from the Bible. Nothing more than that. It's the Bible itself which is being um, said is hate speech and should
I
not
do know
be
about the
repeated.
case. I do know about the case, and I know that this case goes back at least a decade. And I'll tell you how I know. I was serving between 2012 and 2016 on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. In fact, in 2015-16, I was chairing the commission. And this case came to our attention, and we made a strong statement denouncing the persecution of that member of parliament for, basically heresy. That's what she was being prosecuted for. Heresy from this secularist religion. That's a terrible thing that's going on over there. And I'm very sorry to hear that it's continuing now, into a decade later.
The
Outrageous.
prosecution appealed her getting off, and now we're waiting within the next couple of weeks the final result of that appeal, whether she'll be prosecuted or imprisoned or fined or whatever it might be, or let
Well, I have
off.
an idea. I have an idea. Let me just urge this on your listeners and viewers and on people in Finland and everywhere else. Here's my idea. Here's how we deal with controversial speech. You get to say what you think, and you get to cite your reasons, your evidence, your arguments for thinking it. Then I get to talk and I get to say what I think, and I get to cite my reasons and my arguments and my evidence for thinking it. And then you get to say where you think the defects are in my reasoning, and I get to say what the defects are in your reasoning. And then if it comes to a question of public policy that we're debating, then we use whatever the constitutionally, whether it's a formal written constitution or an informal constitution, an unwritten constitution, then whatever the constitutional provisions are for deciding the democratic means set forth in the Constitution for deciding the question, let's go ahead and operate by those means, and we put it to a vote. And at the end of the day, one of us wins and one of us loses. And the one of us who loses still gets to speak and gets to fight another day and can down the line try to argue that we've made a mistake here in our society and our polity. We should repeal that. We should adopt a different set of laws. And that's the way to go. Let's do
Well,
that rather
if
than hauling each other to police stations, putting each other in jail. This is really ridiculous what's going on in
if
countries that like Britain, the United States, Finland, who claim we're liberal democracies, that we're civil liberties respecting countries.
Well, if
What
only we could live in such
hypocrisy.
a world as that, then we might call that world reasonable. But I
Yeah.
believe you've had personal experience of trying to act in presenting your views in that kind of way, and having a great deal of pushback at Princeton. Am I right? Can you tell us something
Not at
about that?
Princeton. No, I mean, I've been treated with the greatest respect, beyond respect, esteem in Princeton. My views on many issues are out of line with the mainstream views on campus, with the dominant opinions on campus. That's been true since I arrived here at Princeton in the fall of 1985, right out of Oxford, where I did my doctorate in philosophy of law. But despite my heresies and my dissent, uh, Princeton hired me, knowing what they were getting, granted me tenure, promoted me to the rank of full professor, installed me in one of the university's most celebrated endowed chairs, allowed me to create and build the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions, permitted me to teach what I want, say what I want, and conferred
You've not
upon me
suffered from
every,
cancel culture at all, then.
not at Princeton, conferred on me every honor the university can confer on me. My one and only incident with intolerance happened at a very obscure, small liberal arts college, not a prestigious place at all, in rural Maryland. Now, Philip, I have given lectures, prominent lectures, at great universities all over the world. I've lectured here in the United States, at Harvard, at Yale, at Stanford, at the University of Chicago. I've lectured at Oxford. I've lectured at Cambridge. I've lectured at great universities in Italy and in Spain and in other European countries. And I have never had so much as a protest. But at this little tiny, small, obscure, rural liberal arts college in Western Maryland, I was giving a talk on, are you ready for it? On free speech. They invited me to come and give a lecture in honor of a great, then deceased benefactor of the college. And so all of his friends were there, and, as well as students and faculty. And I was giving a speech on free speech. And I was about 15 minutes into my speech, and I was talking about the ways in which free speech can be restricted or violated, not only by laws and rules enacted by those in power, but by disruptions from people who violently shut down a speaker, even though the law, technically, formally, the law allows the speaker to speak. If a mob comes and disrupts the speech, then you've sinned against the ideal of free speech by making the free speech impossible. And just as I got to that point in my speech, you're going to think I'm making this up, but it really happened. In bursts a mob who begins shouting and blowing whistles and beating on noisemaker drums, and and they wouldn't stop. And the president of the university was there, and he had an ample security force there, but he refused to order. He was too cowardly, I think. He refused to order the security people to remove the disruptors. And after 20 minutes or half hour, some lengthy period of time with me just sitting there waiting for order to be restored so I could go on with my speech, the event just had to be shut down, and that was it. So my defense of free speech against disruptors was disrupted and shut down. But it's the only time that anything even remotely like that has happened in my 4 decades in academic life.
One gets the feeling that if that doesn't happen to you at some time or other, you're not doing the right things.
Yeah. So I've had my little baptism, I guess.
Yes. The um the nature of university at the moment
Mhm.
is such that there is a lack of courage, as you've recently put it. Um, what do you, how do you assess universities and the state of free speech in academia itself at the moment?
Well, let me begin this way. The whole point of universities, the only reason they exist, the only justification for them, is to seek the truth in our teaching and in our research as scholars. It's our job to try to get at the truth of things, whether it's in the natural sciences, the social sciences, the humanities. That's the purpose, the advancement of knowledge, the deepening of understanding. And as I said earlier, Philip, there's a key condition for that mission to be prosecuted, and that condition is freedom. Freedom of inquiry, freedom of thought, freedom of discussion, freedom to debate, freedom to challenge, freedom to criticize. Without that freedom, we cannot pursue the mission. And how about those of us who are professors, teachers, scholars? We have a vocation, and that vocation is to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. And in our role as teachers, to form the young men and women entrusted to our charge, entrusted by their families to our care, to themselves be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. So we've got to model for our students that courage to speak the truth as best we understand the truth, knowing that we're never going to understand it perfectly and fully, knowing that we'll never understand it free from at least some errors. But to the extent that we've got the truth, or at least believe we've got the truth, we have to be willing courageously to speak it. And here's where so many scholars have let the side down. They're not being faithful to their vocation when they go silent, when they don't say what they know to be true or believe to be true for fear of offending other people, when they allow the university to yield to concepts like hate speech, which restrict what can be thought and said on the campus, that restrict that freedom that is necessary for the flourishing of the truth-seeking mission of the university. Now, there are also threats coming from outside the university, governments putting pressure on universities to restrict people's speech. That's very bad too. But we have to remember the threat can come, and indeed now today does come in both directions, from outside, including the government, especially the government, and then from inside. And on the inside, the threat is not only the bad actors who want to shut down other people's speech, it's the people who lack the courage, the cowards who don't stand up to the bullies who are trying to abridge the freedom of speech. So I think every professor has a responsibility to speak his mind, and every professor has a responsibility to uphold the university's own commitment to free speech. If you're not going to do that, if you're not going to fulfill your vocation as a scholar by standing up for free speech and exercising free speech, then I urge you, to my fellow professors, if you're not going to do the right thing here, go get a respectable job. Sell cars, sell insurance. There are other things you can do. There are other ways to make a living. But once you've decided your vocation is scholarship and teaching, that comes with certain moral obligations. And upholding the freedom to pursue the mission of the university as a truth-seeking institution is one of those obligations.
I mean, a lot of universities in America have truth as their fundamental motto. Light and truth. Yale, I think, is that one.
Yale is lux et veritas, light and truth. Harvard is simply veritas, truth.
Yes, which is
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
You've urged professors to stand up for that, but what is your assessment of how well they're doing at the moment?
Not well. Not well. And you see this and have seen it for 2 decades with things like speech codes restricting people's speech, with university officials taking action against professors who hold unpopular views. I'll give you one. Here's a good example. Uh, there's a professor of geophysics at the University of Chicago, very distinguished scientist, whose name is Dorian Abbott. A couple of years ago, Professor Abbott was invited by MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which fancies itself, and indeed, I think actually is the premier STEM university, science, technology,
Yeah.
engineering, mathematics, STEM university in the world. MIT invited Professor Abbott from the University of Chicago to come and give an honorific lecture, a named lecture that it's a great honor to give, on his specialty, which is figuring out what the climates are like on extrasolar planets. So this is not a political topic, it's not a controversial subject, but Professor Abbott, because of his achievements in geophysics and his expertise in this field, was invited to come to another university, MIT, to give this distinguished honorific lecture on the subject. Well, while the lecture is pending, before it's come time for him to go and give the lecture, he and a colleague publish an op-ed piece, an essay in a newspaper. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was a Los Angeles newspaper, making their case for ensuring that in science, advancement is done exclusively on the basis of merit, that considerations of race, ethnicity, sex, and so forth are not allowed to determine or color decisions about who should be hired, who should be granted tenure, who should be promoted, who should be given endowed chairs. They argued for a pure merit-based uh, um, approach to hiring and promotion. A perfectly reasonable, respectable
Yeah.
position. It's one I happen to share. There are other people who have a somewhat different approach. They think there's an appropriate place in some circumstances to have considerations of race or ethnicity. I don't agree with that, but reasonable people can argue that it's a legitimate debate. Well, when Professor Abbott published that op-ed, there was outrage among the woke, and they denounced him as a racist. Farthest thing in the world from the truth. I happen to know the man. I got to know him after, for reasons I'll describe in a minute, but um, he's very opposite of a racist. He's a person of the purest goodwill toward everyone. He wants everyone to be assessed on the basis of their merits, whether they're black, white, green, purple, red, it doesn't matter to him. He just wants science to proceed with the best thinkers doing their best work. Well, the mob, which was largely online, put pressure on the administration of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to cancel his lecture. And within 8 days, the administration of the greatest STEM university, science and technology university in the world, capitulated to that mob, capitulated to those bullies, and canceled his lecture. This came to my attention, and although I did not at that point know Professor Abbott, I knew nothing about him other than that he was a distinguished scientist. I got in touch with him and said, Professor Abbott, I would like you to come and give the lecture you were going to give at MIT. On the same day you were going to give it, at the same time of day you were going to give it. We will host that lecture here at Princeton under the auspices of the James Madison program. And he kindly agreed to do that. And so the lecture went forward, but not at MIT. We did it at Princeton. Shame on
Mm.
MIT for allowing that to happen.
It
They
is
really should
surprising.
hang their heads in
Yeah,
embarrassment.
I completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. But it's a real surprise to me that those areas of academia, the STEM areas, which are most closely associated, I suppose, with the scientific method, with reason, with
Yeah,
evidence, should be so persuaded of um, unscientific methods. I mean, Richard Dawkins quite recently, I think only this week, has made the comment that the prestigious magazine Nature no longer is interested purely in scientific outcomes, but is more interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion than it is about merit and the merit of particular things. It seems to be
that's
infecting.
absolutely true.
Yeah,
I'm ashamed to say it. I mean, as an academic, because Nature is as prestigious a journal in the academic world, especially in the natural sciences, as there is. There is no more prestigious journal or family of journals than the Nature family of journals. But Professor Dawkins, who's an old friend of mine from New College, Oxford, yeah, is absolutely right that it has fallen into the ditch here in allowing political considerations to intrude on what should be purely scientific judgments. Another very distinguished scientist, Anna Krylov of the University of Southern California, has made a public announcement that she will no longer even review, as part of the peer review process, essays for the journal Nature or any of its family
I
of
read that.
journals because they have sunk into the swamp of ideology and are no longer reliable publishers of good science. So she says until they reform, she will have nothing to do with them. Good for her.
I think that's even affected your more popular magazine, Scientific American, which
Oh, isn't that a shame? That's just a terrible shame, and it's absolutely right. It's been thoroughly politicized. That was once a wonderful magazine, which really brought scientific knowledge to a broad general public. It played a very important role for Americans for many, many, many decades, and now it's utterly compromised itself.
yeah. We're coming to the end of our time, Professor. But can I just ask you one or two final things? And one is
Sure.
about um, the nature of tolerance, which is, I mean, we've spoken about things which are very difficult and things which we disagree with. Karl Popper spoke about the paradox of tolerance, insofar as if you tolerate too wide a group of things, then you end up destroying your own tolerance. How do you solve that particular problem? And where do you draw the line? What is it that you personally think we should tolerate and go so far? And there are certain things that we should not tolerate. And what would those things be?
Well, in academia, we should not tolerate dishonesty. We should not tolerate what is increasingly common, it seems to be, or at least increasingly discovered, and that is people fabricating data and publishing, often to great fanfare, results which reflect nothing more than fabricated data. We should not tolerate plagiarism. That's very important in the academy. We should not tolerate any kind of intellectual or other dishonesty. So those are simply intolerable. We need to be able to rely on each other's honesty and integrity in the debates and discussions that are crucial to the advancement of knowledge. That's how knowledge advances, where you present a paper and I'm invited to criticize the paper, and we see to what extent the arguments in the paper or the evidence in the paper holds up and to what extent it doesn't. But that does presuppose a trust in each other's fundamental honesty, and the project cannot proceed without that trust, which means it can't proceed in the face of dishonesty, especially rampant dishonesty. So that's
Are,
absolutely intolerable.
are there any
Uh,
forms of research which we should be intolerant of? I
oh,
mean,
sure,
subject areas.
unethical research, research that violates the fundamental dignity of human subjects. I mean, if we were doing the kind of experiments Mengele did
Oh,
in the Third Reich, and let's not kid ourselves here, by the way. When I was young, I used to hear people say, "Well, Mengele, his science was no good. If you use these unethical methods, you don't actually advance knowledge." We now know that's not true. You can advance knowledge by using unethical means. Let's not kid ourselves. But we shouldn't do it precisely
about the
because it's
Stanford
wrong.
experiment.
Yeah, exactly. And we can think of experiments that can be done today or work that can be done today that shouldn't be done on human subjects precisely because it is uh, unethical. And I
Yeah.
think, a lot, especially in the area of medicine today, that's going on is really unethical. Sometimes it's just done on the basis of ideology masquerading as science. And fortunately, in some of these areas, we're too late to save some victims, but they're starting to do U-turns, especially in Europe. Well, I think you have an example there. Is it called the Tavistock Clinic in
Oh
London
yeah, yes.
that
Gender
reversed course
reassignment.
finally on these transgender surgeries
Yeah,
on children because they realized it was all based on fabrications. It was all based on
yeah.
false
That's
misunderstandings, all
been
based
closed
on
down.
false alleged evidence. So they shut the thing down, but there were victims.
Yeah,
There were victims before
and
they
no
shut
doubt
it down.
repercussions from that.
So that shouldn't be
We've
done.
come to the last minute, Professor George. I want one last question, if I may, and that is
Sure.
simply looking back over your very long and illustrious career. What are you most proud of?
My students, that's an easy question. When I look at the young men and women that I have been blessed to teach, and I look at what they've accomplished, first as students,
You've got
learning, they
some
take.
famous students. I remember seeing recently that Ted Cruz was one of your students.
Yes, yes, he was one of mine. I've had many wonderful students. I'll mention a few names that if you haven't heard of them yet, you will. Sharif Girgis, Melissa Moskela, Danielle Mark, Ryan Anderson, Rabbi Meyer Soloveitchik, Anna Samuel. I've just been blessed, and I could name. I probably shouldn't have named those because I can't name all. Joel Alice. I could keep going on and on and on and on. But they have gone far beyond anything I imparted to them. I just gave my guests a little I and my colleagues, who they had other teachers besides me, of course, gave them a foundation. And then they built on that foundation things that we could not have imagined, achievements, accomplishments that we could not have imagined. And it gives me such hope for the future, Philip. I just find them so inspiring. I'm so proud of them.
Professor Robert George, thank you very much for your time today. And if anyone wants to take up the ideas further, then I can thoroughly recommend Seeking Truth and Speaking Truth, a collection of essays. It's one of those great books that you can just dip into almost anywhere and still pick up the thing. So thank you very much
Philip,
for
can
that.
I call at the end attention to one of the essays in the very final
Please do.
chapter?
Yes, go ahead.
It's my tribute to my beloved late friend, one of my dearest friends, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who died much too young,
I was surprised to
just
see
five
that
years
in
ago.
there.
Yeah.
Yes, as one of your, you've got a section, the final section is people who you admire. And
And
he
one
was,
of
I think,
them,
the only English
very,
person in
very
there.
at the top of the list, really, is Rabbi Sachs. I remember him so fondly.
Yeah, yes. He used to do what we call Thought for the Day. So BBC Radio 4
Yes,
would have a 5-minute session, and he would often take that. And they were always very inspiring, very interesting. But thank you, Professor George. Thank you very much for your time.
My great pleasure. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.